All right, I want to get into this discussion before we get into talking about some quarterback stuff here. I want to talk about head coaches, and we've talked about names before, but I want to go over. I spent some time putting this together. The qualities that you want in your head coach, and we've talked to a lot of successful coaches, and I wanted to kind of put an image in my mind because it's almost like quarterbacks, right? They're all different sizes, different skill sets, but what do they have in common? What makes the great ones great? And so I looked around the league right now, guys that have had longevity and success in the NFL right now. And these are the names that I wrote down. Andy Reid, who I had a chance to be around, Bill Belichick, Mike Tomlin, Sean Payton, Pete Carroll, John Harbaugh. So those guys have all won Super Bowls. They're all Super Bowl winning head coaches. They all have longevity, and they've all been consistent winners throughout time. Now, we can be cynics and say, well, they've had Hall of Fame quarterbacks with them as well. No doubt. But I think that they're great coaches, and I think they do it all. They have different styles, different personalities. But when I put down on this sheet here, the three things, if I come up with three things that I want in a head coach, the qualities of a head coach, if you're a team and you're looking for one right now, let me give you the three that I came up with here. We start with the leader, and I think that's, that makes a lot of sense, right? We talk about you want a great leader. Well, what does that mean? I wrote down, to me, an excellent communicator. You start there. You got to be able to cast the vision. What is it? What do we want it to look like? You got to be able to create the culture. What type of environment are we going to have on a daily basis? And you've got to be able to cultivate relationships. Mm-hmm. So I need a head coach that can do all those things. He's got to cast the vision, create the culture, and he's got to be able to cultivate the relationships. I don't need somebody stuck in their corner office working on plays all day long. But that's the first one. So I'll rip through the three of these, Buck. I'd love to get your feedback on them. So we've got leader. Next, we've got teacher. And the way I kind of define that is I want somebody who prioritizes details, meaning we are going to be buttoned up when it comes to the details of the game, and somebody that also prioritizes development. And that's on an individual level. I want somebody that can help each individual player get better. And a lot of that comes with being able to cast a vision for them. This is the program. Mm-hmm. Here's where you are. This is what I need you to do going forward. But I think of somebody like Matt Rule, who I hear stories about is in each individual meeting room and can actually coach each position. He's spent time on both sides of the ball, and he's got an understanding there. So we've got leader, we've got teacher. And lastly, I think this is the most important one. Think about these coaches again. Andy Reid, Belichick, Tomlin, John Harbaugh, Sean Payton, Pete Carroll. I think one of those things all those guys have in common is authentic. Like, be who you are. I don't need you to be the next Bill Belichick. I don't want the Whopper Jr. I want the Whopper. Like, just be yourself. And to me, I wrote down authentic. That means you're honest, you're reliable, and you're dependable. That means when things are going good, things are going bad, you're the same guy. You're not trying to be Tommy Tough Guy. You're not trying to be Mr. Motivational Speaker if that's not who you are. Just be authentic. Andy Reid and Mike Tomlin could not have any more different personalities. But they both get the job done because they're comfortable in their own skin. They are who they are. They're authentic, honest, reliable, dependable. That's it. So leader, teacher, authentic. That's it. It's pretty simple.
Look, I love those traits, and it's funny because I was sitting there and I made a list of characteristics for myself. But there's a lot of blend. But in just speaking to you, like leader, I think without question it has to be first and foremost, because I think you have to be able to get everyone pulling the boat in the right direction. Like whatever that is, whatever we're doing, everyone is on board. And so that is your leadership style, your ability to get people on board. Teacher, I think, is something that is underrated, right? It's underrated from a head coaching standpoint. I believe your position coaches for sure need to be teachers and developers, but your head coach, the reason your head coach needs to be a teacher is because the management piece, right? DJ, is being able to, as we're sitting in a team meeting and we're watching the game and we're watching the tape, is being able to pause the tape and say, here's the situation. Here's why we're doing this. This is why. It's being able to explain the why. So everyone in the room is like, oh, okay, I get it. As opposed to, hey, this is what we're doing. We're taking the safety, blase, blase, blase. That is really important. And I think the teacher part is not really talked about enough. And then the authenticity. I put this thing out about the Patriots stuff, right? Like right after Matt Patricia was fired and all the other stuff. Because here's what's funny, DJ. Friday night, I was whatever, going through YouTube or whatever, and I found a thing with Matt Patricia speaking at a clinic at Notre Dame. And there were a million notes that I took because it was actually great. Like it was great as a high school kid. It was about fundamentals. It was about tackling. He's very clear and articulate or whatever. And then this was before he became the head coach of Detroit. This is when he was the D coordinator with the Patriots. And I just feel like if that guy was the one that showed up, then they would have been fine. But the other guy who showed up and did whatever he did, I knew. And I'm gonna say this about Matt Patricia, and here's why I knew he was gonna have a problem. You know, he had always worn his hat backwards when he's with the New England Patriots, right?
Yeah.
Always wore it backwards. He had the pencil stuck in there, but it was always backward. And when he relented after one game of receiving criticism on why he had his hat backwards, I knew he would have a problem because he wasn't being himself. If you've done that for 10 years and that's who you are and that's how you rock your hat, you don't change because you hear Joe Beat reporter tell you, hey, hey, man, this is what I do. And I'm unapologetic about it. Because if I'm going to go down being yourself, go down being exactly who you are. Now, I'm going to talk to my traits, and there's a lot of crossover between, and I broke it down in 5. So I said leader. I believe the head coach has to be able to do this every day. He has to be able to encourage, enlighten, and inspire. He has to be able to get the guys going. He has to be able to teach them, which is the enlightened part, and he has to be able to motivate them to be able to do whatever it is that he wants. Get the group going in the right direction. He needs to be a visionary. You pointed this out. The head coach, when he stands in front of the room, and this is not just in front of the team, but this is in front of the scouts and everybody. Here's the vision for what we're going to be, and here's how we're going to get there. And here's what I need each of you to do so we can make this happen. Is really being able to allow me to imagine how we're going to be a championship team. And each and every day, you give me a reminder of this is why these little jobs that you're doing are important, because as part of the bigger picture, this is where we're going. He needs to be a great communicator. And being a great communicator is not being the motivational speaker, it's being very clear and direct. Here's what I need. Here's what we need. This is what I need from you. It needs to be just very direct. Set and communicate the expectations, make the corrections, challenge, confront when you need to, but it's being able to do all those things. He needs to be a problem solver. One of the bigger things that the head coach can do is, as he's looking at the operation, whether he's managing a side of the ball or not, he has to be able to look and see what's going on. He has to be able to identify the problems, anticipate potential problems, and have an answer for fixing them right away. Because the longer those problems linger, the bigger that it comes back to bite you when you really need it. What's needed? How do we do it better? How do we get there? And then finally, I believe, just like in players, the head coach has to have grit and resiliency. Mm-hmm. He has to be able to, if we get off to a slow start, if we're 0-5, 0-6, he has to have enough toughness about him that he doesn't cave into all the outside noise, that he's resolute in his plan and his process. He knows that the process is going to work. He may have to tweak it, but he has enough confidence in knowing, oh, we'll get this turned around. We just have to figure out how to do it, but we will get it turned around. And he can't cave to all of the pressure of everything that's going on. And it's a tough deal, but they have to have those things. And those traits for me were shaped. I was like Marv Levy, Hall of Fame. Mike Holmgren won Super Bowls. Tom Coughlin won 2 Super Bowls. John Gruden won a Super Bowl. And Marty Schottenheimer won 200 games. And as I looked at all of those guys, those traits were there. And I may not agree with their style, but those traits were there. And that's why they were really, really successful in what they were able to do.
It's so good, man. There's a lot of crossover there going through all that. I like encourage, enlighten, inspire, especially. And guys can do that in different ways. Like I'll give you an example. Jim Caldwell, who, if you look at his record and what he's been able to do, absolutely deserves another chance to be a head coach. I know he's a little bit older, but we talked about Patricia. Look at the job that Caldwell did there before Patricia got there. But I was talking to somebody that had been on that staff with him, and I said, tell me a little bit more about him. Because it seems like he's a quiet man, and you've known him. He recruited me, so I've known him for a long time.
He recruited you?
Yeah. So I'm like, how do you get accountability when you have kind of more of a quiet personality? And he said, let me give you an example. He said, we had guys who would jump off sides, right? So instead, he never said one word about it, right? Never said a thing in the team like, hey, we're running gassers. If you're jumping off sides, take a lap. No, he said, you know what he did? He said they have monitors all throughout the building. And so all of a sudden one day you come in there and it says jumped off sides and has a list of the guys who jumped off sides that day. Never mentioned it. Never mentioned in a meeting. Never mentioned on the grass. Nothing. But it got to the point where you're like, man, I don't want to be on that monitor. Everybody walks around, sees my name up there on that monitor. He found a way to hold the guys accountable without saying a word. I thought that is genius, man. Like that is you didn't embarrass them and dress them down in front of their teammates. It's just in the building. Hey, if you jump off sides, you get on the board. That's it.
Very simple. And I actually love that part. And I will say this, DJ, like he was at Wake Forest when I was at North Carolina. He was coming in. It was right. I think my last year may have been his first year at Wake Forest. And I just always remember looking over the sideline and just the way he carried himself. He just carried himself like a pro. Like he was just very buttoned up. He was very detailed. He carried himself like you would like to envision your head coach. He wasn't a yeller and a screamer. He was all those things. And when I visited him at Detroit and I watched his teams go about it, I was like, man, this dude is just so calm. He kind of reminded me of like how you would play for your dad or how you would play for your granddad. Like, look, you don't want to let them down because they have a high standard and they won't berate you, but you know when you've disappointed them. It's almost like going to the house and you know where you screwed up and they don't say a word, but you know. And I think he was able to do that. And it's funny you talk about the monitor and those things. This is what I think Coach Brown said this on our podcast. He said, you can be demanding, but not demeaning.
Exactly.
You can demand a lot from them, but don't demean them. And so the standards are there. You know what the standards are. Hey, we'll correct you on it. I'm never going to embarrass you. I'm never going to curse at you. I'm never going to do all those things, but we're going to hold you accountable. And that was Jim Caldwell's way of holding people accountable. And I think you can do that in whatever your own style is. But I will say you have a short shelf life. If you're going to be the guy that is calling people out and screaming and embarrassing them or whatever, you can do that, but you better win. Because if you don't win, if you don't hold yourself to that same standard that you're holding the players to, it disappears and it disappears quickly.
Yeah. I mean, give me your thoughts on this because you went through all these lists of things, problem solvers, identify and anticipate problems, the grit, the resilience. I feel like there's a lot of crossover on what we're talking about, the leadership stuff. And to me, when I just look at all of it, Buck, I think that the one word that I'm left with, and I just keep coming back to authentic. There's different ways to get to the finish line, but you got to be you. First of all, if I'm interviewing you and you're telling me about what you've done, and then where you're telling me, what you're going to be like as a head coach, if there's a difference between what you've done and what you're going to do as a head coach, I don't want you. I want to know what I'm buying. I want to know that I'm buying the guy that's actually tried this stuff out and it's been successful, and I'm going to bring that in. I'm not hoping that you're going to come in here and all of a sudden magically turn into some super coach that you've never been before. Like, that's crazy to me.
It is crazy. And, it's funny because this year is unique because we may have 7 or 8 openings.
Yeah.
You're trying to identify like who are the hot candidates, whether they're coordinators or position coaches or whatever. For some of these jobs, I don't believe those guys are the right fits. You and I have talked offline about this may be a year where we see more college guys get jobs, because the one thing that I will say about the college thing, and this really resonated with me when we talked to Brian Kelly a few weeks ago. When Brian Kelly, you asked him a question about, Coach, you've been able to take this program in terms of you build it up at multiple spots and have had success. I know that you're going to be able to do that more times than not. When I look at Matt Rule, did it at Temple, did it at Baylor. The recipe is fine. It's been tried and true. It's tested. I know exactly what I'm getting. I am more likely to lean into someone like that than I am a young guy who haven't seen it. And I know that's not fair to the guys who've never done it, but I'm just more likely to lean into a situation like that, particularly in some of these instances where you may be talking about a Detroit Lions team where you need maybe a cultural overhaul. A Jacksonville well, they haven't dismissed the coach, but if they were to dismiss the coach or whatever, like, it could be a cultural change and an overhaul. Some of these other things, you just need some fine tuning. But I don't know, man. I just think it's going to be a fascinating watch to kind of see how the pieces of the puzzle come together when we have these coaching searches.
Well, it's interesting with the 6 coaches that I mentioned, Super Bowl winning head coaches that have a lot of longevity and success, split down the middle, right? Andy Reid had previously been a head coach. Belichick had been a head coach. Pete Carroll had been a head coach at the NFL level and the collegiate level. Tomlin, no.
Nope.
John Harbaugh, no. Sean Payton, no. So 50-50, right? But I mean, those guys are special. You talk about Tomlin, Harbaugh, Payton. Man, you're talking about big time leaders. I mean, they hit every check that we've gone over here.
The other thing that I would say, especially in 2 of those cases, very stable organizations that give you the opportunity to fully run your program.
And a lot of the machine was built, right? A lot of the machine was built in those locations.
New Orleans was the only one that wasn't built. Sean Payton had to build that one up. This is a little different, but I kind of want to pick your brain because I got asked this, and this is something that kind of came offline. I was talking to maybe you know him, Dwayne Walker, who used to be coach.
Dude.
He's a good dude. He was a
New
coach
Mexico State, UCLA,
New Mexico State, UCLA, whatever. And I want you to think about this when we're thinking about the general manager job. Dwayne told me one day we were talking. He said, my biggest mistake when I was at New Mexico State is I went and I talked to all of these other coaches who were in different situations to me. So I went and talked to Urban Meyer. I went and talked to other guys who had all of the resources. Well, their plan for building a program is different than the plan that I have to take at New Mexico State. And so, DJ, I think for some of these jobs, I think it's really important that the person that you put in the seat comes from a similar type deal. Meaning, for instance, we've talked about it. Like, so I'm taking a small market team. We'll just use Jacksonville because I'm tied to Jacksonville. So Jacksonville, to me, I'm thinking, okay, well, what is a situation that is very similar to this? And I think there are a handful of situations. Buffalo is a situation where it's small market team. You don't necessarily have all things. Pittsburgh is like that. Green Bay is like that. There's some other things. I'm more likely to look at someone who has been around those kind of things and seen how you've been able to do it there than a New York Giants situation or a Dallas Cowboys situation where it's a big market, big thing. You kind of have all of these outside resources. I just think it's really important that you identify people who understand what they're stepping into and they've had success in similar environments. So they don't come down here thinking that, oh, we're going to completely change the stuff. No, here's what you have to work with. Here's what you have to deal with. Do you have the wherewithal to make it work right now, right here where we are?
Of all these guys, to me, Sean Payton would be the brain that I would want to pick. If you're going to be the head coach, you're hiring the head coach there in Jacksonville. Sean Payton, because that was an organization who had success with the Dome Patrol, but that was going back quite a few years.
Hadn't had a lot of success,
and just kind of really an afterthought in the NFL, to be quite honest with you. Not a stable organization in terms of historical success. So to me, talking to John Harbaugh, who walked into Baltimore after they had won a Super Bowl, been to the playoffs a bunch, and obviously the Pittsburgh Steelers, all the trophies they had with Mike Tomlin, different. And I think when you look at Andy Reid and Belichick, it's just a different situation. Sean Payton taking over New Orleans, to me, would be kind of the blueprint. That's what you're trying to find, the next Sean Payton, to me, if you're Jacksonville.
Yeah, and I think that's a great one because I really hadn't had a great appreciation for what Sean Payton had to do. But when you think about New Orleans, New Orleans have been down in the dumps.
Not to mention, there's Katrina that comes in right on.
Katrina's come in. They didn't have any significant history. This wasn't a perennial winner that you're trying to bring back. There's nothing, we talk about traditions and things that you can hang your hat on. Having played in Green Bay, DJ, I can tell you, everything always went back to the Lombardi era because you're in that town and because that town really connected with Lombardi and the titles. You better have an appreciation for that history, and you couldn't deviate too far from how they did it during the Lombardi era. And so that era was about like selflessness, team, not a lot of self-promotion. It was always about the Packers. Other organizations are different. And so I do believe you have to dig down and understand the history of where you're taking over, and you have to embrace it. And if you don't have any history, then you have to find a way to build your own. But that takes someone who is a visionary, who does have a plan, who does have a process that will take them to that.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good discussion, man. That was a lot of fun.